My mother shut the porch light off while my 14-month-old twins slept in the back seat of my car. My husband had been dead for 11 days. I had $612 left, and all I asked for was 3 weeks on her sofa. She looked past me, past Milo and Ren, and said, "We can't be your safety net, Sloane." 8 years later, that same woman walked onto my ranch in Texas, dressed for cameras, expecting a piece of my $96.8 million sale. She thought blood would get her a check. She didn't know every signature was already dry. Every dollar was protected. And the people who had actually saved me were sitting in the front row. Chapter 1: The Porch light went dark. The night my mother told me I was not her safety net anymore. I was 27 years old, 11 days widowed, and standing on her porch with my twins asleep in the back seat of my car. Milo and Ren were 14 months old. They still smelled like baby shampoo and powdered formula, still reached for me with both hands. When they woke up scared, still believed the world ended at the edge of my arms. I had $612 in my checking account, 24 days left on the lease of a house I could no longer afford, and a life insurance policy that could not help me because one final medical verification had never been completed. My husband, Sloane Calder, had been dead for less than 2 weeks, and I was already learning that grief did not stop rent from coming due. Ilias had been 30. A ranch equipment mechanic who could take apart a hay cutter blindfolded and make an old truck sound young again. He died on a cold November afternoon in 2017, while working around a piece of mowing equipment that had jammed near a client's back pasture. I got the call while I was warming Milo's bottle and changing Ren on a towel spread across our living room floor. By the time I reached the hospital, a woman with kind eyes and a clipboard was asking me to sign forms I could not read through the blur. They gave me his wedding ring in a small envelope. I remember thinking it looked too small to be the last piece of a whole man. People came after the funeral with casseroles and soft voices. They hugged me, promised to call, told me I was strong, then returned to their own warm houses. By the 10th day, the refrigerator was full of food I could not swallow, and the mailbox was full of bills that did not care my husband was gone. I did not go to my parents because I wanted a rescue. I went because I needed 3 weeks. That was all I rehearsed in the car during the 95-minute drive toward their house outside Lubbock. 3 weeks. A sofa. A corner of a room where my babies could sleep without me counting every dollar between us and the street. I told myself any mother would open the door for that. Even my mother, even Marla Whitaker, who had spent my childhood teaching me that needing help was a character flaw. My younger brother Brennan had always been different. He got the new cleats, the summer camps. The down payment for whatever dream sounded impressive that year. I got lectures about grit. I used to think that made me special. That night, driving with 2 car seats behind me and my wedding ring cutting into my palm, I began to understand that sometimes a family trains one child to survive without help. So, they do not have to feel guilty when they refuse it. Their porch light was on when I pulled into the driveway. It made the brick house look warmer than it was. I sat for almost a full minute before getting out, watching Milo's chest rise and fall in the rearview mirror, watching Ren sleep with one tiny fist curled around the edge of her blanket. I rang the bell once. My mother opened the door wearing a cream cardigan and pearl earrings, her hair smooth, her face arranged into the polite concern she used at church when someone else's tragedy required a proper expression. My father, Grant, stood in the hallway behind her. He was 64 then, tall but already shrinking into himself, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. Down the hall, Brennan opened his bedroom door just enough to see me. He looked past me to the car, saw the 2 car seats, and quietly shut the door again. I said Elias was gone. My voice sounded too small for the words. I said I needed a few weeks to figure out the lease, the insurance, daycare, work, anything. I told her I was not asking for money. I said the babies could sleep in their portable cribs, and I could take the sofa. I remember hearing myself say sofa like it was a luxury item. My mother did not step aside. Not 1 inch. She folded her arms and glanced toward my father, then back at me. She said the house was not set up for babies anymore. She said she and Dad had their own obligations. She said Brennan was in the middle of expanding Iron Halo Fitness, and they could not take on chaos. Then her voice softened in that terrible way people use when they want cruelty to sound like wisdom. She said, "We can't be your safety net, Sloane." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Safety net. As if I had fallen for sport. As if Elias had died because I had failed to plan better. As if the 2 sleeping children in my car were a bad decision she should not have to subsidize. I looked at my father. He was looking past my shoulder toward the driveway. Milo shifted in his seat, and the motion made the dome light flicker faintly through the back window. Grant saw it. I know he did. Ren made a small sound, not quite a cry, just the soft, restless noise babies make when they feel cold. I waited for my father to say my name. I waited for him to tell my mother we could come in for one night. I waited for him to be the kind of man I had spent 27 years hoping he might become if the moment were serious enough. He looked down at his shoes. I said, "Okay." That was all. Not because it was okay, but because I had 2 children asleep in a car and no strength left to beg people who had already decided I was a burden. I turned around, went down the porch steps, and walked back to the car. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to try twice before the driver's door opened. Just as I slid into the seat, the porch light went out. The whole front of the house disappeared into darkness behind me. I sat there with both hands on the wheel, staring at the black glass of their front windows, and understood that some doors do not close with a slam. Some close with a switch. I drove until my vision blurred too badly not to trust the road. Outside Plainview, near a gas station off US 87, I pulled beneath the harsh white lights and parked beside an air pump that clicked and wheezed in the cold. Milo and Ren were still asleep. That was what finally broke me. Not my mother's face. Not my father's silence. The fact that my babies were peaceful because they had no idea their mother had just run out of places to go. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and cried for the first time since the hospital. Not pretty tears. Not movie grief. The kind that makes your ribs hurt and your throat close until you sound like a stranger. I called Ruth Calder because my thumb found her name before my pride could stop it. Ruth was Elias's mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice rough with sleep. I meant to say I was sorry for waking her. I meant to say I would figure something out. Instead I said, "I don't know what to do." Ruth did not ask why I had not called sooner. She did not ask what my parents said. She asked where I was. When I told her, she said, "Don't move." 40 minutes later, Walt Calder's old truck pulled into the gas station with its headlights cutting through the cold. Ruth climbed out before the engine fully stopped. She was wearing a coat over her nightgown and carrying a blue quilt stitched with little white stars. Walt did not say much. He never did when something mattered. He opened the back door of my car, checked the car seat straps with hands that had fixed fences, shod horses, and held dying animals steady. He lifted Milo like the child had always belonged in his arms. Ruth tucked the blue quilt around Ren, then around Milo, and brushed my hair back from my face the way my own mother had not done since I was a child. She handed me a warm casserole dish wrapped in towels. An old yellow marigold pattern chipped at the rim. I started to say I could not be a burden. I started to promise I would pay them back. Ruth looked at Walt, then back at me, and said, "Set 2 more plates. They're ours now." I followed Walt's taillights north through the dark toward Sable Creek Ranch near Canyon, Texas. The road stretched flat and empty beneath a sky full of stars. In the back seat, Milo and Ren slept under Ruth's blue quilt, their faces soft again, their little mouths open, safe for the first time that night. I kept one hand on the wheel and one hand pressed against the envelope with Elias's ring inside my coat pocket. I thought I had lost my family on my mother's porch. I did not know yet that the porch light going dark was not the end of my story. It was the first honest thing my family had ever shown me. Chapter 2. The Mare Everyone Mayaziridi. Sable Creek Ranch was not the kind of place people put on postcards unless they stood very far away and let the sunset do most of the lying. In daylight, it was 96 acres of wind, debt, patched fences, dry grass, and old wood that had learned to lean without falling. The farmhouse sat low against the Texas panhandle, white paint peeling around the porch rails, one screen door hanging slightly crooked. There were 2 barns, both tired. One had a roof that leaked in 3 places. The covered arena had a torn section of metal roofing that rattled whenever the wind came hard from the north. The tractor coughed before it started, and sometimes Walt spoke to it with more patience than most people used with children. But no one at Sable Creek looked at me like I had arrived with a bill taped to my forehead. That first morning, Ruth put 2 high chairs at the kitchen table, like they had always been there. She learned by noon that Milo liked his milk warmer than Wren did, and by supper, she knew Wren could not have the strawberry puffs I had packed in a half-empty diaper bag. Walt came in from the barn with hay on his jacket, poured coffee into a chipped mug, and set a second cup beside the notebook where he wrote feed counts and fence repairs. He did not ask how long I planned to stay. He did not mention rent. He only tapped the page and said, "If you are up before me, start with the south stalls. If you are not, sleep." I did not sleep much. I did not know how to be helped without trying to earn my oxygen back. At my mother's house, love always had an invoice hiding somewhere inside it. At Sable Creek, Ruth would put a plate in front of me and walk away before I could apologize for needing food. Walt would fix the latch on the room where the twins slept and say nothing when I thanked him too many times. I cleaned stalls until my shoulders burned. I dragged hoses, carried feed buckets, patched fence wire, swept the wash rack, and took small jobs from neighbors who needed someone to hold horses for the vet or watch a mare overnight. Twice a week, I picked up part-time shifts at a clinic outside Canyon, mostly cleaning exam rooms and logging records, because standing still made grief louder. One night, somewhere between midnight and morning, Walt found me asleep on an overturned bucket in the wash rack. The hose was still running, water crawling across the concrete toward my boots. I woke to him turning the faucet off. I jumped up so fast I nearly slipped, already saying I was sorry, already promising I would finish. Walt just draped an old barn coat over my shoulders and said, "Nobody is keeping score out here." Then he picked up the bucket I had dropped and carried it away like the matter was settled. I stood there in the damp cold, shaking under that coat, realizing I did not know what to do with kindness that did not ask to be paid back. Before Elias died, I had spent years trying to build a life that made sense on paper. I earned my equine science degree through a Texas A&M Commerce Extension program, taking night classes from 2010 to 2016, while working as a vet tech and doing whatever barn work paid cash. I knew conformation well enough to know when beauty was hiding a weakness. I knew temperament mattered more than flash when pressure got high. I knew bloodlines, soundness reports, reproductive records, and the difference between a horse that looked good for a buyer and a horse that could still be honest after 10 hard years. But after Elias died, all that knowledge felt like loose tools scattered across the floor. Sable Creek was the first place where I began picking them up again. Walt showed me the back barn in December, after the first hard freeze. Most of the horses watched us with the usual mix of boredom and suspicion. At the far end, in a stall with chewed boards and a crooked nameplate, stood a 5-year-old mare named Juno. She was a deep bay with a narrow blaze and eyes that did not beg to be liked. At first glance, I understood why buyers had passed over her. She did not stand picture perfect. One front knee carried a slight old deviation that made cautious people see future vet bills before they saw anything else. Walt leaned on the stall door and said they were taking her to a sale after New Year's if they could get enough gas money and a decent lot number. I should have nodded. The ranch needed money more than it needed sentiment. But Juno stepped out when Walt opened the stall, and something in the way she placed herself made me stop breathing for half a second. She was not flawless. I never pretended she was. But when Walt asked her to move, she balanced herself like she was listening to the ground. She stopped with her whole body, not just her feet. Her eyes stayed soft when the barn door slammed in the wind. When a loose tarp snapped off a hook, she startled. then came back to herself almost instantly. That mattered. A horse that could feel pressure and return to thinking was worth more than a pretty horse that panicked beautifully. Walt watched me watching her. He said, "She is not one we can afford to keep for dreams." I ran my hand along Juno's neck, feeling heat and muscle under winter hair. I said, "Give me until spring." He looked at me for a long time. Maybe he saw a widow trying to save a horse because she could not save her husband. Maybe he saw something else. I do not know. But he finally nodded once and said, "Until spring." I did not turn Juno into a miracle. Miracles are what people call work when they do not want to count the hours. I started a training log in a cheap spiral notebook. I had her checked properly, built her conditioning slowly, adjusted everything around keeping her sound, not proving a point. I studied her pedigree at night after Milo and Wren fell asleep. I called High Plains Veterinary Reproduction Center and asked what records they would need if a mare like her ever became worth evaluating for embryo transfer. The woman on the phone sounded amused, but she answered every question. I wrote it all down. If Juno had a future, I wanted it built on facts, not hope wearing lipstick. The twins learned the ranch before they learned many words. Milo took his first steady steps, gripping the edge of Ruth's kitchen chair. Wren learned to say horse before she said grandma clearly, though Ruth cried the first time Wren reached for her and said it anyway. Walt carved 2 little wooden saddle shapes and sanded them smooth so the kids could drag them around the porch. On their 2nd birthday, Ruth made cupcakes with uneven blue frosting and sang louder than anyone. My mother sent a card 3 weeks late and signed it to the babies. On Christmas in 2018, she called and talked for 12 minutes about Brennan's plans for Iron Halo Fitness, then asked if the babies were doing fine. I said, "Milo and Wren." She paused, then said, "Of course," like she had known and simply misplaced the names for a moment. I hung up and watched Ruth wiping applesauce off Wren's chin, knowing exactly which twin hated cinnamon and which one would eat it from a spoon. By 2019, Juno had earned her chance. We hauled her to a small regional reining and cutting event on a morning so cold. My fingers ached around the lead rope. I did not expect her to win. I wanted to see if she could hold her mind in a noisy place. She did more than that. She finished in the top 5 out of 38 horses. Not perfect, not polished enough to make anyone gasp, but honest in a way judges noticed if they knew what they were looking at. I was untacking her beside the trailer when an older woman in a dark felt hat walked up and asked, "Who taught you to read a mare like that?" Her name was Vivian Hargrove. I knew the name before I knew the face. Everyone in performance horses did. She had spent more than 40 years building lines other people tried to copy. I told her I had learned to look closely at things people were too quick to dismiss. Vivian smiled, not warmly, exactly, but with interest. She handed me a card and said she wanted to see Juno's records. 3 weeks later, Vivian came to Sable Creek. She watched Juno move in the arena, then sat at Ruth's kitchen table with my training logs, vet notes, pedigree marks, and the spiral notebooks I was embarrassed to show anyone. She did not laugh at the cheap paper. She did not call it cute. She read every page. Then she looked at me and said I was not pitying that mare. I was building a case for her. Vivian offered to invest in a small breeding program, but by then I had learned something important from being broken. Feelings could feed you for a night, but paper protected you for the years after. I called Patricia Monroe, a lawyer in Amarillo who handled agriculture, business sales, and trusts. Pat was 48, blunt, and expensive enough that I paid her in installments for months. She helped form Sable Creek Performance Horses LLC and wrote Vivian's agreement clean. Vivian would hold a minority stake with a clear buyout path. I would keep control of Juno's bloodline rights, breeding records, genetics data, and the direction of the program. No handshakes pretending to be contracts. No gratitude twisted into ownership later. When Pat slid the signed agreement across her desk, my name looked strange beside all that legal language. Stronger than I felt. Safer than I had been. I touched the ink with one finger and realized it was the first document since Elias died that did not take something from me. It protected what I was building. I did not know yet that one day my own family would come looking for a piece of it. But for the first time since my mother's porch, there was a wall between my future and anyone who thought love gave them the right to take it. Chapter 3: The family that remembered me too late. For a while, the wall held. It did not make life easy, but it made life possible. Between 2020 and the beginning of 2024, Sable Creek stopped feeling like a place that had taken me in out of pity, and started becoming something with a pulse of its own. Juno was never a machine, and I never treated her like one. We worked with High Plains Veterinary Reproduction Center, planned every breeding carefully, used embryo transfer only when her body and her records said it was responsible, and matched her with stallions that strengthened what she already carried without pretending her flaws not exist. Some of her offspring were ordinary, and I learned not to take that personally. But two changed everything. One won a regional futurity with a stop so clean the crowd went quiet before it clapped. Another went to a trainer in Oklahoma for more money than Walt had once hoped to get for 3 horses combined. The first real check did not buy me a new truck or a better wardrobe. It paid down the note Walt had been pretending not to worry about. It patched the barn roof before spring storms came through. It replaced broken panels in the covered arena and covered a contract with High Plains so we could keep proper reproductive records instead of gambling on memory and luck. I hired 1 ranch hand 3 mornings a week, then 5, then full-time. Walt stopped hiding bank letters in the kitchen drawer. Ruth still cooked too much, but now the old yellow marigold casserole dish sat in the middle of a long table with ranch hands, trainers, vet techs, and 2 sticky children reaching across it for biscuits. I had arrived at that table unable to feed myself without shame. Somehow, without noticing the exact day it happened, I had become someone who could feed other people. My family by blood stayed mostly quiet during those years. Marla called on Christmas, sometimes on my birthday, if Facebook reminded her. Grant sent cards late, with careful handwriting and nothing inside, but a check so small it felt like an apology he was afraid to name. Brennan appeared only when Iron Halo Fitness had something shiny to brag about. My parents helped him open the first location in Lubbock, then the second, then talked about the third, as if expanding debt was the same as building success. Every time Marla mentioned his business, she used the word investment. When she talked about me, she used words like strong and independent. The same words people use when they want to admire your suffering without helping end it. Milo and Ren were old enough by then to notice absence, even if they did not have the language for betrayal. Ren came home from preschool one day with a crayon drawing called My Family. There was me with wild brown hair. Ruth wore a blue dress. Walt had a cowboy hat twice the size of his head. Milo was beside a horse that was clearly Juno because Ren had drawn 1 white sock and a very serious face. There was no Marla, no Grant, no Brennan. I asked gently if she wanted to add anyone else, and she shook her head. Grandma Ruth came when we were babies, she said. Milo looked up from the floor where he was lining up plastic horses by color. Is Grandma Marla the grandma who doesn't know which one of us is older? I did not know how to answer without teaching him to make excuses for people who had never earned them. So I said the only honest thing I could. Grandma Marla has not spent much time learning you. He nodded like that made sense. That hurt worse than if he had cried. By late 2023, Sable Creek was no longer a secret people whispered about in feed stores. One of Juno's colts placed on the national circuit. Our breeding waitlist stretched 22 months. A Western performance magazine ran a profile on Sable Creek performance horses and called Juno's line one of the most quietly disciplined programs in the Panhandle. I did not look for attention. Attention found us anyway, and once it did, my mother found my number like she had not known it by heart all along. She called on a Tuesday afternoon, not a holiday, not a birthday, not any day that gave her an excuse. Her voice was warm in a way that made the skin between my shoulders tighten. Sloane, honey, I saw the article. Your father and I are so proud, and Milo and Ren must be getting so big now. She said their names correctly, but slowly, like she had written them on a note beside the phone. They are 8, I said. Of course, 8, my goodness. We always knew you had grit. I stood in the tack room with a saddle blanket in my hands and remembered the porch light going out. The woman who had not opened a door for 2 sleeping babies was now trying to sound like she had been cheering from the front row. Brennan called the next week. He did not ease into it. Iron Halo Fitness was in trouble. 2 locations had closed. The third was stuck under a lease he could not afford. The equipment loan was overdue, and payroll was getting ugly. He needed $280,000, but he did not call it need. He called it a bridge loan, then an opportunity, then a chance for me to invest in family. I am not investing in Iron Halo, I said. He laughed like I had made a joke. Come on, Sloane. Family helps family. I looked through the office window at Milo, helping Walt carry a grooming tote that was almost too heavy for him. You opened your bedroom door in 2017, saw me on the porch with 2 babies, and closed it again. Brennan sighed. You have got to stop being dramatic. Everybody was overwhelmed. It is time to move on. There it was. Move on, which usually meant stop remembering what someone else wanted forgotten. A month later, Grant came to Sable Creek alone. I found him outside the barn, hands in his jacket pockets, looking older than 64 and smaller than any father should look to his daughter. He watched Juno graze beyond the fence before he spoke. I think about that night, he said. I kept my hands busy with a lead rope. Which part? He swallowed. Seeing the car seats, hearing one of them cry after you turned around. I should have opened the door. I waited, because some part of me was still foolish enough to hope grief had made him brave. Then why didn't you? He looked toward the house, though Marla was 95 miles away. Your mother was scared. Brennan needed us focused. I did not want to tear the family apart. The laugh that came out of me did not sound like mine. Dad, the family was already apart. I was just the only one outside. He flinched. For one breath, I thought he might finally choose me. And now? I asked. If Mom and Brennan come after me, will you stand beside me? Grant rubbed both hands over his face. I do not want to lose your mother. That was his answer. Not yes. Not I am sorry enough to change. Just the same silence dressed in softer clothes. After that, Marla stopped being subtle. She posted an old photo of me from high school with a caption about the daughter they had prayed over all these years. Diane Whitaker, her closest friend from church, commented about family roots and God's timing. Pastor Elaine Brooks sent me a private message saying parents got older, forgiveness mattered, and money should not harden my heart. I did not answer publicly. I took screenshots and sent them to Pat Monroe. Pat replied 10 minutes later, save everything. Do not argue where people are performing. Then Brennan started telling people Sable Creek had always been family-backed. That phrase reached me through a client in Amarillo, then through a trainer, then through someone who said a local reporter had been asking questions. Family-backed, as if Marla's closed door had been a down payment, as if Grant's silence had been sweat equity, as if Brennan's failure gave him a share in my survival. The email came on a Thursday morning in February 2024. Brennan meant to send it to Marla. But autocomplete chose my name because he had been hounding me about money for weeks. The subject line looked harmless enough, something about talking points before Mom calls Sloane again. I opened it standing in the small office off the barn, expecting another demand disguised as advice. Instead, I found 2017. Marla had written, Sloane is a bad investment right now. Then another line. We cannot pour good money into grief. And another. Do not burn the bridge completely. Land can turn around, and so can ranch families if someone else does the work. Grant had replied, Brennan needs us focused. Brennan had written, she chose that broke Calder life. I read the thread once. Then again, the room did not spin. I almost wish it had. Instead, everything became very still. For years, I had tried to make their cruelty smaller by calling it panic, fear, bad timing, emotional distance. But those emails had dates. They had names. They had sentences typed by people who had slept under a roof while my children slept in a freeing car outside a gas station. They had not abandoned me because they were overwhelmed. They had done the math. I forwarded the entire thread to Pat without adding a word. Then I walked out to the pasture fence. Juno stood in the Texas wind with her head low, steady as stone, a mare. Everyone had once read wrong because they were too busy pricing the flaw to see the value. I rested my hands on the top rail and finally understood what my family had seen when they looked at me that night. Not a daughter, not a widow, not a mother with 2 babies. A bad investment. What they did not know was that I had spent the years since then, learning exactly how to protect valuable things before the wrong people came back to claim them. Chapter 4. Every signature was a wall. The offer from Red Mesa Western Media and Events arrived in June of 2024, on a morning when I was rinsing mud off my boots outside the barn. Mallory Keene called first, then sent the packet. She was 41, direct, polished in a way that did not feel fake, and she spoke about Sable Creek like she had studied it long before she ever dialed my number. Red Mesa owned Western event circuits, streaming sing shows, apparel lines, and enough media rights to turn a quiet ranch into a national brand. They did not want just the land. They wanted the facility, the Sable Creek name, the client contracts, the Juno performance line, the breeding records, and the stories people were already telling about horses that learned fast and stayed honest under pressure. Mallory did not whisper the number. $96.8 million, structured acquisition. Not a suitcase of cash. Not one clean check that could be handed across a table. A portion up front after closing, a portion held in escrow, and the rest tied to earn-out terms, future performance, licensing, and media revenue. Harlan Price, their 55-year-old head of risk, would handle due diligence. Mallory said his name the way people say storm warning. He is careful, she told me. Careful does not scare me, I said. It scares people who have something hidden. I looked across the yard at Milo and Wren racing each other toward Ruth's porch, their boots kicking up dust, and I knew exactly what the money meant. It was not a number to brag about. It was a door my children would never have to beg someone to open. It was Ruth and Walt never reading another foreclosure letter. It was a way to put something good into the world for the kind of woman I had been, broke, grieving, and still trying to look useful enough to be helped. Vivian Hargrove came to the ranch 2 days after I told her. She stood at the pasture fence with me while Juno grazed beyond us, older now, steadier, still carrying herself like she knew more than she said. "Are you selling because you want freedom?" Vivian asked. "Or because you want to prove something to them?" I did not pretend not to understand. "Part of me wants my mother to know what she threw away." Vivian nodded like she had expected the truth. "Then do not let that part sign a $96 million contract." I looked at her. "What should sign it?" "The part of you that wants your children safe." That was the answer I held on to when the first rumors reached Red Mesa. Marla had been busy in the church circle, telling people I had become cold, that I was keeping my parents from their grandchildren. That money had hardened me. Diane Whitaker repeated it with polished sympathy. Brennan told anyone close enough to the horse business that Sable Creek had always been family-backed. That phrase traveled faster than truth. It reached a trainer, then a client, then a local agriculture reporter named Cole Brennan, and from there it reached Harlan Price. The next call from Red Mesa was not warm. Harlan's voice was flat, professional, and completely uninterested in my feelings. "We need to pause part of the review until ownership exposure is clarified." My stomach dropped so hard I had to sit down. What exposure? Potential family claims, oral promises, informal backing. Anything that could create litigation risk before or after closing. I pressed my palm against the desk. "There is no family backing." "Then your counsel can document that." For the second time in my life, my family stood between me and a safe home. The first time, they had closed a door. This time, they were trying to cloud the title on everything I had built after walking away from it. Pat Monroe did not panic. She arrived the next morning with a rolling case, 2 coffees, and the expression of a woman who enjoyed turning chaos into exhibits. "Give me everything," she said. So I did. Sable Creek Performance Horses LLC Operating Agreement. Vivian's Investment Contract. The Buyout Path. Juno's Breeding Records. High Plains Veterinary Reproduction Center Files. Deed Records. Paid Notes. Client Contracts. Every seat showing who had worked, paid, fed, repaired, hauled, and risked. Then, I gave her the 2017 email thread. Marla calling me a bad investment. Brennan saying I chose that broke Calder life. Grant choosing focus on Brennan over his daughter and grandchildren. Pat read it twice. Her mouth tightened, but her voice stayed calm. Paper does not heal the wound, Sloane. But it can keep the people who made it from signing their names on your recovery. That was when I stopped thinking of the sale as one decision and started thinking of it as 3 walls. The first wall was for Milo and Ren. Pat drafted an irrevocable trust designed to protect their education, medical needs, housing security, and future from charm, guilt, lawsuits, and relatives who suddenly remembered their names. I did not want my children to inherit my fear. I wanted them to inherit locked doors that kept the wrong people out. The second wall was for Ruth and Walt. A quitclaim deed, tied properly to closing and escrow instructions, would transfer the 96 acres, the farmhouse, and the right to live out their lives at Sable Creek free and clear. There would also be a funded account for repairs, taxes, insurance, Walt's knee surgery, and the kind of comfort neither of them had ever asked for. The third wall was for someone I had not met yet. The Calder Memorial Equine Scholarship Fund would help people studying equine science, with preference for single parents, widows, and working students. Pat mentioned a young applicant named Lena Ortiz, 26, a widow working nights at a veterinary clinic. I read her file and had to put it down halfway through. She sounded like a woman standing where I had once stood, except this time someone would open the door before she froze outside it. Marla sent gifts to the twins that fall. Milo got a toy he had outgrown 3 years earlier. Ren got a sweater 2 sizes too small and a card with her age wrong. Ren held the card at the kitchen table, her face careful. How does she know Juno's name from the magazine but not mine? Milo did not look up from his homework. Grandma Ruth knew us when we were babies. There are sentences children say that sound simple because they have not learned to soften truth for adults. That one stayed with me. The first voice I heard belonged to my mother. Just because other people liked the word forgiveness, I would teach my children that people could abandon you, rename it love, and come back when you became useful. Pastor Elaine Brooks came to Sable Creek in January. She was not cruel. She was just carrying Marla's version of the story like it had been handed to her in a clean dish. Your parents are getting older, she said. Sometimes healing starts with one conversation. I slid a printed page from the email thread across the table. Only 1 page. Enough. Would you ask Milo and Ren to trust a woman who called their mother a bad investment 11 days after their father died? Pastor Elaine read it. Her face changed slowly. She did not apologize for Marla. She simply folded the paper back toward me and said nothing for a long time. The day before the announcement, Marla came alone. She stepped out of her car in a navy dress, hair set, makeup perfect, as if the ranch were already a stage. She hugged herself against the wind and looked around like she was measuring where cameras might stand. I am proud of you, she said first. I let the words sit there until they showed what they were, too late and too polished. Then came the tears. Then blood. Then forgiveness. Then the old line about how families should not embarrass each other in public. Finally, when none of it moved me, her face hardened. Are you really going to humiliate your family in front of the whole Texas Panhandle? Before I could answer, Ruth opened the screen door and stepped onto the porch with the blue star quilt folded over her arms. The same quilt from the gas station. She walked to me, placed it over my shoulders, and stood beside me without saying a word. Marla looked at that quilt, then at Ruth, then at me. For once, she seemed to understand that there was a family standing in front of her, and she had not built it. That evening, Pat called after sunset. Trust documents are signed. Deed instructions are ready. Foundation is registered. Escrow language is approved. Non-disparagement is secured. Red Mesa Legal has cleared the file. I sat at the desk in the little office off the barn and looked at the last page until the ink felt almost alive. Every signature had a purpose. Every clause had a name behind it: Milo, Wren, Ruth, Walt, Lena, Elias, me. By the time my mother arrived looking for a check, every signature that mattered was already a wall. Chapter 5. No check was coming. The morning of the announcement came with a hard Texas wind, and a sky so clear it made every edge of Sable Creek look sharper. Folding chairs lined the covered arena in long rows. The red mesa backdrop stood near the rail, simple and tasteful, not glamorous enough to hide the dust on anyone's boots. Coffee steamed from metal urns beside the barn. Ranch hands walked past in clean shirts they had clearly ironed for the first time in months. Trainers, clients, neighbors, vet techs, local press, and Red Mesa's buyer team filled the space with low voices and nervous laughter. It was not a red carpet, it was still Sable Creek. Hay, leather, wind, sweat, and people who knew what it meant to build something with their hands. Mallory Keene arrived with the Red Mesa team just after 9. Harlan Price stood near Pat Monroe, holding a folder against his chest like even cleared legal files still deserved suspicion. Vivian Hargrove sat in the front row, hands folded over her cane, watching everything with the calm of a woman who had seen rich men make fools of themselves, and poor women build empires from the ground up. Ruth wore a pale blue blouse and kept smoothing the sleeve like she was trying not to cry before anything had even happened. Walt leaned on the fence rail, his bad knee stiff beneath him, pretending he was fine. Milo and Wren stood between them, one on each side, as naturally as if the universe had placed them there from the beginning. Then I saw Marla. She came through the gate with Grant, Brennan, Diane Whitaker, and 3 women from the church circle I recognized by face but not by kindness. Marla wore a navy dress and carried a folded tissue in one hand, ready for the camera before the tears arrived. Grant walked half a step behind her. Brennan wore a gray suit pulled too tight across his shoulders and scanned the crowd until he found Cole Brennan, the local reporter. I watched him cross the arena and clap Cole on the arm like they were old friends. I could not hear every word, but I heard enough. Family effort. Long road. Always believed in her. Marla leaned toward a woman beside her and said something that made the woman look at me with moist admiration, as if my mother had raised me with sacrifice instead of a locked door. I did not move. Some people do not need to be exposed. They will climb onto the stage of their own lie if you give them enough rope. Before the announcement began, Cole approached me with his recorder in hand. Marla drifted closer, slow and careful, pretending not to listen. He asked whether my parents had been part of the journey. I looked past him at Ruth adjusting Wren's collar, at Walt bending down so Milo could whisper something in his ear. I said he would hear me thank the people who showed up. Marla's face tightened, just for a second. Mallory opened the event with practiced warmth. She explained that Red Mesa Western Media and Events had entered a structured acquisition of Sable Creek Performance Horses, LC, valued at $96.8 million. She kept it plain, the way I had asked. It was not a single check. It included land, facility, brand, media rights, client contracts, and the Juno performance line, with part paid up front, part held in escrow, and part tied to future performance and licensing. Harlan nodded once when she mentioned the cleared file. That single nod felt like a gavel. Then it was my turn. I walked to the small platform and looked at the rows of faces. For one moment, I was back at that gas station off US 87. My forehead on the steering wheel, my babies asleep behind me, my whole life reduced to cold air and no place to go. Then Wren smiled at me from beside Ruth, and the past loosened its grip. I told them that in 2017, I came to Sable Creek with 2 babies in car seats, no house, no money, and no plan that reached farther than the next bottle. I said there had been a door that closed, and then there had been a truck that came. I did not say Marla's name. I did not have to. The people who needed to understand would. I thanked Ruth for the blue quilt, the hot food, and the chair she added, without asking for repayment. I thanked Walt for giving me work instead of pity, for trusting my eye when all I had was a tired mare and a notebook full of questions. I thanked Vivian for investing with terms clean enough to protect both trust and dignity. I thanked Pat for teaching me that clear paperwork does not make love colder. It keeps love from being turned into a weapon. I thanked Juno. The Mare people had misread because they priced the flaw before they studied the heart. Then I looked at Milo and Ren and told the crowd that survival had not been enough. I had to build a life where my children would never have to stand outside a door and wait to be considered worth opening. The first announcement was for them. The irrevocable trust for Milo and Ren had been created and funded through the upfront and escrow structure of the sale. It would protect their education, medical care, housing security, and future. No guilt could reach it. No relative could charm it open. Brennan shifted in his seat. Marla blinked at the word irrevocable, like it had struck her in a language she almost understood. The second announcement was for Ruth and Walt. The quitclaim deed and settlement instructions would transfer the 96 acres, the farmhouse, and their lifetime right to remain at Sable Creek free and clear after closing. A separate funded account would cover taxes, repairs, insurance, Walt's knee surgery, and the kind of rest they had spent their lives postponing. The crowd rose before I finished speaking. Walt bowed his head. Ruth covered her mouth. Milo and Ren clapped so hard their palms must have hurt. Grant did not clap. He stared at my children standing beside Ruth and Walt, and I saw the moment he understood. He had not only lost money he never owned. He had lost the place in their hearts he had never bothered to build. The third announcement was the Calder Memorial Equine Scholarship Fund. Its first award would go to a working student like Lena Ortiz, 26, widowed young, working nights at a veterinary clinic, trying to study equine science while the world told her practical people gave up dreams. My voice almost broke there. Not because of Marla. Because somewhere, years earlier, I had needed someone to tell me I was not a bad investment. That was when Marla stood. She said I had humiliated my parents in front of the entire community. Brennan rose beside her and said family had rights, that our parents had sacrificed, that I could not sell a family story and pretend I had built it alone. His voice carried across the arena, loud enough for cameras, loud enough for the church circle, loud enough to become the performance he had been rehearsing. Pat stepped forward before I had to. She did not raise her voice. She explained that every ownership record, LLC agreement, bloodline right, deed instruction, trust document, and foundation filing had been executed or placed properly through escrow. There was no family claim, no contribution, no ownership, no oral promise. Nothing but a wish dressed up as entitlement. Brennan said they would sue. Pat looked at him and said he could hire anyone he liked, but a wish was not a claim. I looked at my mother then. Not at the crowd, not at the cameras, not at the money she thought might bend me back into daughterhood. Just at her. I told her she had been right about one thing. No one is entitled to a safety net they cut with their own hands. The arena went so quiet. I heard the wind move through the open side of the barn. Mallory gave a small signal, and Red Mesa staff escorted Marla, Grant, and Brennan away from the platform. Marla said I would regret it. Brennan muttered about lawyers. Diane would not look at Pastor Elaine. Grant walked out without a word, the same way he had stood without one in 2017. 2 weeks later, a demand letter arrived. Marla and Brennan claimed family contribution, oral expectation, emotional support, and implied partnership. Pat answered with the LLC records, Vivian's agreement, breeding documentation, trust papers, deed instructions, the non-disparagement clause, and the 2017 email calling me a bad investment. Their attorney did not pursue it. By the end of summer, the last Iron Halo fitness location closed. Marla kept telling anyone who would listen that money had changed me. But fewer people listened after Pastor Elaine saw what my mother had written when I was 11 days widowed. Grant sent one final message. He said my mother would never forgive me. I did not answer. I had spent too many years wanting forgiveness from people who treated love like an invoice. Ruth and Walt stayed at Sable Creek. Walt had his knee surgery. Ruth took him to the coast for the first time in decades and brought back a little jar of sand that she kept beside the yellow marigold casserole dish. Milo started saying he wanted to be a veterinarian. Wren said she wanted to run the scholarship fund. Lena Ortiz cried when she received the first award letter because someone had finally told her that her dream was not a burden. I kept 18 acres nearby and a young mare named Sable Creek's last light. Sable for short. I still bred a few horses, not because the bank was waiting, not because Marla was watching, not because I needed to prove I had been worth keeping. I did it because I loved the work, and because some things deserve to be read carefully before the world decides what they are worth. On quiet evenings, I stand by the pasture and watch Milo and Wren run toward Ruth and Walt like they are running home, because they are. I still remember the porch light going out in 2017. Back then, I thought darkness meant I had no family left. Now I understand it differently. Sometimes a door closing is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is just proof you were knocking on the wrong house. I did not lose my family on my mother's porch. I found my real one on the road away from it. If you were in my place, would you have given Marla, Grant, and Brennan any part of that money? Or would you have kept it for the people who showed up when there was nothing to gain? Leave your thoughts below, and if you enjoy stories about betrayal, family drama, revenge, and quiet justice, subscribe for the next one.